shall we? Right. Hello, welcome to 120 TVR. It is time, so we are going to start. I will go through just for the first few minutes a couple of chair slides, just where we are at the milestones, what is the status of current documents, and then we will get into it. We have a 60-minute session. Next slide. So it is Thursday at the end of the day, but still note well that we are here at the IETF by participating. You agreed to our policies and procedures. There is a somewhat of a large set of BCPs underneath, which hopefully we are all familiar with. Next slide. Somewhat new is a renewed reminder that we will need appropriate behavior in all of our working group sessions, appropriate described in BCP 54, but summarized here that we would like respect and courtesy for all colleagues at all times, and to have impersonal and technical discussions going forward. Next slide. If you are looking for various resources, IETF agenda, TVR agenda, how to get onto Meet Echo, here we go. Please make sure that if you are in the room that you have logged into at least the in the room tool, please make sure you have joined the queue before going to the microphone. Next slide. And here's how you do that if anyone is unfamiliar at this point with Meet Echo. Next slide. We would like to make sure that we have good notes from these meetings. So we would ask if someone is willing to be sort of a primary note taker on the shared notepad. Would anyone volunteer for that? Okay. Maybe? Adam, looking at you. Share notes, thank you. Otherwise, please join and help out. Here's our mailing list. Next slide. So one thing before we get into the document presentations is we did look through our milestones and we adjusted some of our dates. We talked about this on the mailing list. We ran a 2-week call on the mailing list with no issue. So we've extended some of the dates, particularly around the applicability statement and other considerations. We would like to try and finish up requirements as we can in the next few months with the data model soon thereafter. Just to take a moment, are there any concerns with the milestones that we have or the changes to the milestones? Okay, next slide. So we have started making progress on almost all of these milestones. The use case document, which is now at Rev 9, is on the RC editor's queue. So we are waiting for that. The requirements document is now at Rev 03. We will be hearing about it today, and one of the questions we will have is this ready for working group last call? Similarly for the Schedule Yang module, and we are now just looking to start work on the applicability statement. Next slide. So we're going to be walking through each of these in turn, and we do have some time left over in the agenda for open mic to talk about anything additional. But before we get into it, any other additions or changes to the agenda? Okay. With that, Tony, anything else to add? Nope. Nope. Okay. So why don't we start? Our first presentation is going to be on the status of TVR requirements with Daniel King.
Do I have control? Or?
Unfortunately, no. USBA.
Yes.
So I see that I have 15 minutes. Yay. I don't think I'm going to need all this time, but I do like listening to the sound of my own voice. So let's see. Next slide, please. So if you've been asleep for the last 3 IETFs or not paying attention to TVR, why not? Welcome. This is the requirements document. As Ed just mentioned, it was one of our objectives of the working group. It's a requirements that should sort of outline several clear objectives of a data model at some point and the applicability of that data model. We have 3 main authors, but several contributors. We essentially collected requirements from several documents that were submitted when the first sort of working group was created, or we had our first meeting when the working group was created, and there were already several drafts that were looking at potential requirements based on sort of different use cases. And this is really the document that collected some of the common requirements, and then actually there were some additional requirements we hadn't considered initially. Next slide, please. So we have an assumption with a time variant network that there will be intrinsic as well as occasional changes. These are planned, they are scheduled, depending on where you live. We know that TVR can be applied to a wide range of scenarios, fixed network, radio networks, free space optics, if you are that way inclined. But categorically, fundamentally, these are not unplanned changes, although there may be situations where there is a catastrophic failure that may affect a planned change in link status, but that is not necessarily something that we've captured in the requirements document. We do expect that the network will have a particular time horizon, and essentially we've got a schedule that will address changing requirements, whether it's bandwidth, capacity requirements, maybe it's situational, location dependent, maybe it's going to be due to some kind of occlusion. We will sort of investigate based on different use cases what requirements are necessary. Next slide, please. If you've read the document, and hopefully most of you have at least read or scanned one version of this document, you'll see that we structured the document in terms of motivation, components, which includes a terminology section, and we felt it was important to have consistent use of language across the different TVR documents. That said, it's also important to be consistent with other IETF technology as well. So when we're talking about things like controllers, we're really generally talking in the parlance of, say, path computation element. And we kind of map those onto using a controller, i.e. a PCE, to manage potentially a network. In that network, you'll have nodes or entities. We have structured the document to address, in terms of requirements, 3 categories of use cases, and these map to what were described in the problem statement and use case document. So resource preservation, operating efficiency, and dynamic reachability, covering some of the scenarios I've just mentioned. And then we have some main sections with subsections that really talk about all of the sort of key characteristics, functions, requirements of a time variant network. Next slide, please. So what's changed from the previous version to the current version of the document that was recently submitted? Actually, the previous version was fairly stable. There were sort of some TBDs, but in the previous version, we addressed the significant gaps that were still remaining. So that was mainly related to some operational considerations and security. There was some terminology that needed to be cleaned up. In this version of the document, we've kind of gone through an editorial review. We've also added a new section. I say added, the section title or subsection title was already in the document, but it was empty, that really talks about sort of constraints. And these are your factors that may affect a time variant networking. So now we've got, I think, 4 categories. Yeah, you can count them. And within each of those categories, there's some sort of description text here. But if you read the document, those sections are expanded. And again, these are heavily dependent on the 3 use case slash categories from the previous slide. So you'll find that sort of weather conditions would affect mobile base stations, potentially, maybe sort of LEO constellations where you've got sort of ground stations talking to LEO nodes or as part of the constellation that are flying overhead. Things like predicted traffic demand, operating efficiency, maybe those are more related to tidal use case, the tidal use case example that we've talked about often in the working group, essentially something like a campus network where it's quite easy to measure and then predict demand and then manage the nodes in a way that you're reflecting behavior of users, but also trying to maximize the efficiency in terms of power of the node itself or nodes. Next slide, please. So where are we now? Essentially, we have a complete document. There are no TBDs or editor's notes that I'm aware of, so I should caveat that. There's certainly no open PRs, essentially tickets in GitHub at the moment that says we really need to write something because someone's asked a question on the mailing list. When I look through the charter, which I do refresh my memory occasionally, and what the objective of the requirements document was, I believe, or the authors believe, that we've kind of met the objectives. We have one example within the document that sort of talks about the different requirements and how they apply to a particular use case. So potentially we could expand that, but actually maybe that's probably the role of an applicability document rather than the requirements document, because we shouldn't be biasing any potential solution work. Thinking aloud at the moment, there was a discussion on the list around if an information model was required, but we're already stabilizing the data model. So no, we probably don't need an information model, but is there something that you might document in an information model, maybe sort of a high level sort of view of function that would be useful? Maybe that should actually be put in the data model. Maybe it could be put in the requirements. Do I have any more slides? I can't remember if there's another slide. Oh, there's another slide. So do you, readers, and if you haven't read the document, please read it, feel that the document meets the objective and the milestone? Is there anything obvious that's missing? Is there something that's maybe not quite so obvious that we could do within the document? Otherwise, we would sort of solicit reviews, and we can look to address those on the mailing list, and then hopefully prepare the document for last call.
I do have two questions,
Yep.
both with chair hat off. So opening up the -03 for the requirements, just a comment, it is missing an introduction. Section 1 is blank.
Yeah.
So all four short introductions,
Yeah.
but probably not null introductions. And that sort of then leads to the second sort of question, is where we talk about security considerations. There are a few, they are sort of impacted by this concept of time variance. Is there something that rises to the level of requirement that should be part of a stronger statement on security than just considerations?
Yeah. We are often remiss when we think about security with some of these protocol works and data models. We get excited about what we're going to put on the wire, less excited about actually how do I protect my network and negate or mitigate attacks. I think security is incredibly important, right? We're introducing this technology into the network, opens up all sorts of threat vectors. I'm not sure if the requirements document can do a good enough job, per se, of looking at security and the impact of a network schedule and the techniques that you might use to push or execute the schedule or synchronize the schedule across the network. But I'll take an action to look at the section again, see if maybe we need to provide some additional detail, and maybe as part of the having a conversation with the authors of the applicability statement, if there's one posted at some point, we can provide input to something that's maybe can go into more detail.
Yeah, and I didn't have a particular recommendation in mind, other than if we were to make a technical read through the requirements, is there any requirement that should be there related to,
Yeah.
must be authenticated before or something.
There is, I
like
mean,
that.
we talk about, in terms of security, we talk about how the schedule is generated, who has access, how it's, but these are all high level. What you might do, authenticate, encode, or encrypt, verify access, and so on and so forth. But they're all high level bullet points with like a few sentences for each class.
No, thank you. Maybe one last part with Chair Head-On is with minor change, like just adding a small introduction dash report. Is there anyone that does not believe this document would be ready for working group last call? We will, of course, do a formal poll in the mailing list, but just a sense of the room now, is there any concern that we would not be ready for a working group last call? All right. All right.
Okay,
I think that's it. Thank you so much. Okay, so next on schedule is Eric, who will be talking to us about the Yang schedule model.
Right, I think we go to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, I'll just give a brief summary of what has changed since last meeting. So the first thing is that, of course, the IETF schedule draft has changed a little bit along the way, and so we've incorporated the latest version of that. And I guess most of the rest of the changes really have been sort of refactoring what was already there. So we've combined some of the lists of schedules into a single list, so that all of the all of the attributes are in one place, and it's quite a bit more compact than it was before. Also, there have been some comments about data types that we've used, and so we've made some adjustments there. I suspect some more adjustments are required. Next. All right, so just a quick review of what's in the draft. So there is these three parts. There's a grouping that you can use to augment whatever thing that you're working on that needs a schedule. And then we have a couple of uses of that in here. So a device model and a network topology model, both of which use that particular grouping. Okay, next. All right, so this is the current definition of the schedule grouping. And some of the feedback we got before was that we should do away with time zones. And some of that was just part of the IETF schedule, but we've made use of some groupings that they have now that omit time zone and just assume UTC. Next. All right, and this is the device model. With a few things, or a couple of things pointed out here where we have gotten some feedback on types, and there's I guess a question of whether or not we want to be consistent with other things like the TE types module, or perhaps the by the IETF network topology model. So in here we've got things that are more in line with TE types, for example, for the node ID. Next. And here, and I think this is largely the result of drafts being merged. This is more in keeping with the network topology model in terms of node ID, for example. So the things like the bandwidth, for example, has been made a bit more generic as opposed to the TE types, but that's something that would be good to get a little more feedback on if there are opinions about that. And next. Okay, and I think that concludes all of the changes that we've made in the interim. So if there are questions, be glad to try to answer those. Otherwise, I think that's all.
So, sorry, I just, a quick question, again, chair hat off. So node ID will always be a URI and not necessarily a dotted quad.
I think it's a little inconsistent at the
Okay.
moment. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to use one over the other in either, in either of those models, if we're aiming for consistency with something else that's already existing.
Okay. So that would be sort of then my comment back is that we should do a scrub for consistency through these. Well, we have sort of two other folks in the queue.
Oh, okay.
Zen?
This is Yingzhen from FutureWay. So speaking as a co-author, so one open issue we have right now is the node ID type. In the device model, we have it as dotted quad. And in the topology model, we have it as URI. So we know that, so we left that on purpose. We want to know the community's feedback, which one we should choose. We look at, I look at the IETF model that's published. So most device model, like protocols for router ID or node ID, we use dotted quad. And for some topology models, that's why the topology model we choose to use the INET URI. Yeah, so we do want to get some community's feedback, see whether we have any preference. So just like last time when we try say, do we want the time zone? Everybody said, no, we don't want time zone. So we got rid of that.
Oh,
so it's an open issue and we want community's feedback.
No, thank you. And just to add, we are here. So maybe I would also just ask the question, do we feel strongly about dotted quad versus URI? Just open to folks either, if anyone would like to join and chime in.
So essentially it's a dotted quad versus a string. Yeah.
Louis?
Yes, one comment here in relation with the next presentation. I have a suggestion of a case where probably we could require some more detailed, some grouping, let's say, of links. For instance, as you will see next, in the situation of removing one card, so instead of specifying link by link, the ones that will be impacted, probably we can do some grouping for, just simply indicating that one card will be decommissioned, for instance, and then a number of links will be impacted. Probably will become more clear in the next presentation. This could be something necessary to be reflected in the model.
Thank you. Tony?
Hi, Tony Lee, Juniper, hat off. Isn't dotted quad IPv4 specific? That seems a little bit 1996.
Agreed. Brian Cepos?
Yes. Question about the time variant attributes. Is there a reason why only bandwidth was singled out, or is there an expectation that this model will be extended by other uses?
Yes, it is designed to be extended as needed. So the attribute value container is what gets augmented by whoever uses this, and the two example usages that we have with the topology and the device model both show exactly that. So there's an augment, or excuse me, a user statement with augment. So we just put the what we thought might be the most common things there.
Yeah, so right now in the model, we are trying to model all the attributes that can change with a schedule. So bandwidth is one of them. We think that may have these characteristics. So the next steps we have the questions for additional attributes. You know, if you think of something more we should add, please let us know.
Rick?
So I think the previous answer on the question about dotted quad raises a sort of a question I have, and please tell me where I'm wrong. And the question is, how generic are you trying to make this Yang model? Is it, I have a selection of links which are IP address based, so we'll argue about dotted quad or IPv6 support, or blah, 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 and the attribute is bandwidth which changes? Or is it, here is a model about properties of a link, which has, and the link has identifiers that may change? Because in that case, the argument about dotted quad might be a URI or some more generic Yang data type that is suitable for derivation. I'm trying to pick something. DTN example would be a bundle protocol. EID could be something that changes over time. I'm sure there's MPLS or layer 2 things, you know, where that's my question, is how specific or general purpose are you aiming with this?
I think we had something fairly general purpose in mind. I think it may take a little. Oh.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm being corrected here. It is a node ID which is derivable, so that if I've got some other type of node identifier that isn't an IP address, I can still use the model with a bit of extension. So I think I prefer URI because it gives me the most flexibility.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, Gunther van der Velde speaking as a contributor here. Can you go back like 2 slides, because I forgot the name of the leaf. Yeah, so here. So here I actually see, like, you know, the schedules and schedule ID. I see the same thing in different places. So normally when I write my own Yang kind of thing, I tend to use like a leaf ref to point to each other, so that, you know, it's actually aligned together. And I think you have a definition in here, like in each place differently as a uint 32. So are there, you know, are the schedule IDs what you have here, like, you know, in the different places, are they aligned to each other or not?
The schedule IDs, I don't think there's any correlation in schedule IDs between the modules, if that's what you're asking. So I don't think there's no special meaning encoded in that integer value.
Yeah, so sorry, I was probably unclear there. So you see, like under the interface schedule, you have like a, you know, a schedule ID there. And you have the same thing if you go higher to node schedule, you have a schedule ID there.
Ah, okay, yes.
See what I'm going to? So normally when I have like the same, you know, leaf name, I tend to use like a leaf ref, because you configure it once and then you sort of like, you know, then you have like automatic validation from the moment you configure these things.
Okay. Right. So there is no correlation between them, because these are 2 independent lists. So it's maybe a little bit hard to read up there, but
yeah. So if
they're not nested.
So if they're like 2 independent lists, then should they have the same name? Probably doesn't matter, because you're like in a different parent node. Yeah. So.
Right.
Am I next in the queue? Yeah, I'm next in the queue. Cool. After Gunja. So I think this really highlights actually why it's so important to have early implementations and some prototyping, because it kind of irons out the bugs and then feeds back into this sort of iterative process of developing the data model. So one of the things on the agenda later today is actually looking at a hackathon in Dublin. We can kind of save that conversation hopefully towards the end of the conversation, but I just would absolutely encourage people who are interested in putting a prototype together and want to kind of work with others. We at Lancaster University are working on an implementation. We hope to do that in Dublin with others as well.
All right. Just to join quickly with chair hat on, do we feel that with some minor discussions related to things like node ID as a URI and maybe some other naming changes, that this is, does anyone feel this would not be ready for a working group last call? See, Daniel? Oh, okay.
I was leaving the queue, but someone had already done it.
So quickly, does anyone feel that this would not be ready for a working group last call? Obviously, we would do a call on the mailing list, but while we are here, any concerns? Have we given a scrub of this through the requirements document? Will we be able to see traceability between these documents? Not formal traceability, but are they, is one informed by the other? Yes, let's. Rick?
I'm going to be that guy. I'm not sure this is ready for last call. I think that, there was some questions from the floor. I don't think it's far, but I think there's a few more questions around the dotted quad, maybe about that leaf usage. You said it was separate. Just when questions are turning up like that, it feels that perhaps one more rev and a bit of list discussion might be useful. And I promise to join in that conversation rather than being silent.
What, just a moment to that is, if we do have concerns on that, what I would do is ask that we post those concerns on the mailing list so that we could then have those discussions there. Dan?
Yeah, Daniel King. So I would hope that the authors of the data model would be reviewing the requirements document, and then the requirements authors can review the data model. The last call is too early, because if there need to be changes, especially as we're sort of signposted that we plan to do some implementations and do some interoperability, anything that comes out of that session would provide guidelines and potentially updates to the data model as well.
Thanks.
I think we will at least try to do a couple of iterations before the next IETF, and for next IETF, we will look at, see whether it's ready for last call.
Sounds good. And Don?
Hi, Don Fedek. With regards to cross-referencing with the requirements, I think that'd be a good idea. But my own mental model, I get stuck when I go across some of the attributes. Like, for example, priority. I think of if there's a single source of this information, who cares about priority? But if there's multiple sources of this information, maybe that's something we need to look at. And, that's just a quick browse. So I think it's worth doing that. But the concept of where and which environments, maybe also, I don't have a complete picture of.
Which then is just last, and I know we've kept you up here for a few minutes longer. If the idea is that we could have a few iterations of this document, or a new iteration of this document for Dublin that might be ready then for working group last call, what I would just ask is, if you have not read through this document already, to please do so and provide those comments to the mailing list so that we could get things updated for 121. All right, thank you so much. All right. And next up, we will have Alto exposure.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I will present an update on this draft about using Alto for exposing time variant routing information. Next, please. So a little bit of recap about what is the purpose here. The idea would be to have some off-path mechanism to expose schedule changes on the topology to be consumed by applications. These applications could be internal, that could be a packet core from the mobile network, for instance, or a CDN, internal CDN to the operator, or could be even external, maybe a connectivity between data centers, or even external CDNs. So the draft has been presented I think in all the meetings up to now. As I said, the idea is having a kind of off-path mechanism. This off-path mechanism could coexist with on-path mechanism, so they do not conflict. In fact, the off-path mechanism could consume the information being distributed on path in order to populate later on the schedule changes. And the benefit or the beauty of these off-path capabilities would be that somehow the processing could be run far from the network elements, but this is another story. I mean, that somehow the processing could be done by an external entity. This somehow relates with in the requirements document we refer as centralized solution. So it will serve the purpose of exposing these scheduled topological changes to services, as said, either internal and external. And we refer here to Alto as a kind of tactical reference in the sense that Alto is a standard solution from IETF, and also Alto incorporates a way of exposing different topological views along the time, which are this cost calendar feature. So somehow this is right, but generalizing the point, whatever, let's say, off-path solution could be used here. We have seen here in IETF all the push, Kafka bus, these kind of things. So basically, well, we are focusing on Alto as an example of those possibilities, those capabilities. Next, please. So the changes from the previous version, we have added a kind of applicability statement, so simplifying what would be the exercise of the YAM model here. The scenario that we are figuring out here is basically one engineer from the NOC will proceed to perform any kind of intervention in the network. Could be the removal of a card, a software upgrade, or whatever thing that you can imagine. So this can be done for sure in advance to the proper intervention in the network, and these changes can be somehow populated to external applications so that these external applications or internal, I mean, let's call it applications in general, will be aware of these topological changes at the point that these topological changes will happen. Okay, so somehow we can populate these changes. Next, please. So apart from that applicability statement, we also reported some identified gaps, or what we understand that could be gaps. One is what I was mentioning before in the microphone. So probably we could require to have a finer granularity or further granularity in the model. For instance, if we are working on having some actions in the card, for sure we can specify one by one the links that will be impacted, but probably would be more convenient to specify the group of links that will be impacted. For instance, referring to the card. If the card has so many ports as 48 ports or 72 ports as we have in the routers today, it would be very overwhelming having this in the going, let's say, in the granularity of link. So probably it would be better to have further levels of granularity. Also, another thing that we report here is that the conflicts. No, so having when you have a centralized element for you can somehow have better ways of arbitrating conflicts in the changes. So it could be the case in a distributed scenario where different changes are populated. So we need maybe what Don was referring before, that priority or so. In the centralized, we will have a more overarching overview, and probably it's easier to handle. The third point would be the ways of reverting changes. Also, this is something that could happen. So we need maybe to elaborate more on what could be the possibilities of reverting changes that are previously scheduled. Maybe the priority would be, again, the solution. And thinking on as well on this situation of exposing to others, to external applications in this case, schedule changes, probably that could be a security problem. The fact that these applications could access to the on-path distribution of these schedule changes. So probably the off-path somehow provides a more secure way of exposing these changes. Apart from that, we have added a section for implementation. It's not yet, I mean, it's empty by now. But the point here is that we are implementing the scenario, the situation that I saw at the beginning. So we expect to have this completed for next IETF, and then reporting and made available as open source, whatever stuff that we are doing for simplifying and exercising this scenario. And finally, the last point that we did was a refinement on the compliance of the requirements. So I think also it's important for every solution to match again the requirements so that we can be sure that more or less we are fitting the requirements that we are basically defining. Next, please. So as next steps, we would like to collect further feedback from the working group. The previously received comments we consider that have been already addressed. We are working yet on the implementation, and we will report the new gaps if any appears on that implementation. As said, for next IETF, we expect to have an initial version of the scenario that we have shown before. And yeah, and our idea would be to ask for adoption as a path solution for TVR. If that is the case and the document is adopted, this also could even trigger some additional work on the Alto staff for fulfilling all the requirements. For instance, the requirement of time overlap is not covered today in the cost calendar feature, so this would require some extension for Alto. That probably is the only requirement that is not covered, if my memory do not fail. And yeah, and we refer here to Alto as soft path solution, but somehow could be generalized. Maybe could be also an option to generalize and not put the focus on Alto, but move these on the off path solution in general terms. And that's all. Thank you.
So myself and Don are in the queue. I have two questions. First, with chair hat off, if we go to slide 3. The sort of simple question is, as we have made changes and updates to the schedule Yang module, then are we tracking those changes here? And if things have changed in the schedule, for example, time zones and so on, are we agreeing with those changes to hold things together?
Yeah, here, but I think I use the more recent model. So, and this, basically, we are exercising the model. We are not questioning the model.
Okay.
So it's just exercising the model for somehow being able to specify intervention in the network for maintenance and so on.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't have any concern with the model. We are using as it is, no more than that.
Right. And then I'll ask my second in just a moment. I'd like to go to Don first.
This actually might apply to the requirements more, but the events over the last week remind me of back in the day when you used to make a change to configuration that isolated your node or something. It wouldn't stick and it would roll back. But with the time variant stuff, we may have put a case in where we could do something in the future, and the time executes, and then we isolate a node or something. Do we have any safeguards for that? That if we execute something in time variance and a node is isolated itself, maybe it should roll back that time variance or have a contingency plan for it. That's for a requirement.
Yeah.
To Dan. Okay.
Daniel King. Yes. Where am I? I'm at the mic. We definitely, the synchronization and who is responsible for generating the schedule, what mechanism pushes it, when is it actuated, executed. These are all really interesting problems, but they're really hard to think about at the moment. And so although we have sort of thought about them, there are things about synchronization and responsibility in the requirements document. I would imagine, and this is kind of a question I was going to have with Lewis after the meeting, what about if you have multiple controllers in the network? Is there a primary controller or a parent, an active controller, and then there's a standby controller? What happens if a node receives 2 requests to modify a resource at a particular time or day of the week? How do you handle collisions and priority? This discussion has already started, by the way, in ops, because we've got the generic schedule Yang document as well. So maybe we kind of need to sync up a little bit and see if there's like common aspects. The question I was going to ask for Lewis, and I will now, is the open source code that you mentioned, is that TFS? Is that the ETSI TFS project, or it's something else?
It's open source being developed in framing another project, a Spanish project called Optimize.
Okay.
But basically what we are exercising is the scenario that they saw in the first slide. So having this NOC engineer requesting some change, then calculating the impact of the change and then performing the change in the network. But having a mechanism, path mechanism for advertising that, we are using Alto for this.
Thanks.
Okay.
And just a final question with chair hat on, which is we had mentioned the idea of working group adoption of this as a potential off-path solution. again, to the mailing list, but while we are here, are there any concerns with the idea of adopting this work for TVR? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And finally, for our other chartered item, a TVR applicability statement. Lee?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon. This is Li Zhang from Huawei. I will represent the authors and the contributors to introduce the TVR applicability draft. Next slide, please. Okay, I can control. As we know, the TVR Charter defines the milestones, which include the applicability statement. It depending on the use cases to apply TVR model and the additional IETF models required. And it will describe which function components will configure TVR entities and additional process and messaging mechanism. So, based on the about target, we created the draft framework for the control scheduling of network resources, which intended to provide the applicability statement on how TVR young and accelerate young models may be used. This document provides functional components to service a time variance scenario, including the entities and additional challenges such as conflict resolution, priority handling. And this page shows the basic functional components. It includes a schedule service requester, which making the scheduling request of the network events, policies, services, and resources. The schedule service responder access and reacts the scheduling request. In detail, it includes a resource manager and schedule manager, conflict resource, and policy engine. In the following way, I will introduce how the schedule framework operates in the tidal network use case. The tidal network means the traffic on the network has a various tidal period, including a heavy traffic periods and a light traffic periods. The time duration of the heavy traffic and the light traffic are clearly identifiable. For example, in the campus network, the dormitory traffic peaks at night and is light in the daytime, and the teaching area traffic is the opposite. So based on the traffic pattern, the switching time between the heavy traffic and the light traffic period is well established. So in the tidal network, the low tide topology requires less resources, and the devices and the pods can be shut down or put to sleep to save energy. The figure below shows an example which includes two topologies for the heavy traffic period and the light traffic period. Compared to the topology at heavy traffic period, the light traffic period topology could save 28% port power consumption. So what process would be required? Firstly, the network operator needs to monitor the traffic on the interface to build a traffic profile. It can establish a clear tidal points for low and upper network traffic. Secondly, the operator needs to run a simple algorithm to establish a minimum and peak topology to service expected demand. And thirdly, the operator needs to create a network schedule to reflect the minimum and peak traffic demands. It specifies when and which devices should be shut down or power up. And fourthly, the schedules need to be distributed to the devices, and fifthly, the devices need to execute the schedules. The last two procedures will be decided for the planned hackathon. In addition to the process, what network data is required? So we identify the following IETF young models that will be used in the title network use case. They include the IETF interface, which is used to control the attribute for specific interfaces, and the schedule young, and also the TVR schedule young. Maybe there may be other data are also needed, but we haven't identified there yet. So this may be further developed in the hexagon. And how the about process and the data are interoperate in actual development. We provide an example here. The figure includes three components. They are a schedule service requester, which is an administrator, and a schedule service responder, which is a network controller, and also a topology with 6 nodes and 7 links. The administrator requests a schedule to shut down pods from 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock a.m. LED. And when the network controller receives this request, it needs to check whether there is a conflict with other schedules. If there is no conflict with other schedules, the schedule manager will create a schedule and store it to the schedule database. And the resource manager will allocate the port resource for this schedule. The policy engine will enforce this schedule policy and generate the young models for specific nodes. Then the network controller will distribute the TVR node young model and to the specific nodes, and also distribute the TVR topology young model to all the nodes. The nodes received the node schedule will execute it and shut down the specific pods at the indicated time point. And finally, all the nodes will execute routing tables. It will calculate routing tables based on the time variant topology. Okay, that's all the procedures. And here we also provide a young code example for title network. In this code, the node will power up from 1st December 2025 to 1st December 2026. The interface 1 will power up at 7 o'clock LD and last for 80 hours. And we also would like to organize a TVR hackathon based on the TVR use case to show how the proposed framework can be used for scheduling scenarios and implement the applicable IETF young. The young code JSON examples will also be generated. And in the next step, we needed to develop a good use case, and based on that, implement the required young models and the JSON examples. So would this be a useful document for TVR? And are we missing any functions or models for the use case? And we are welcome anyone who are willing to be a partner for the TVR hackathon, and the questions and suggestions are always welcome. Thank you. That's all.
So just Ed with chair hat off, I just wanted to say I loved looking through this, and I think in particular the discussion of what is the applicability of the work we are doing in TVR to some of these use cases is going to be very interesting. And starting with title, I think is a good place to start. And my guess is there are similar applicability assessments that we could be making for other things, and maybe that's a good segue into a general open mic session anyway. But done.
Just in this example, a case that was just actively monitoring the network and adjusting the load versus following a schedule for a comparison. I mean, I can think of a lot of cases where you might get the schedule wrong, even though you think you've got it right. And so it probably needs to measure itself anyways. And the question is TVR the right tool to be using for this particular use case? That's what I would question.
It's probably not the right tool, but this is a good example of using TVR.
Joel.
Okay. Without prejudice to the question of whether netconf would be a good protocol to communicate this, or whether Alto would be a good protocol, or we should invent a new protocol. We're all good at inventing protocols. I went and looked at our charter, and the charter is very explicit about what our scope of work is, and it doesn't include protocol solutions. So while I understand the temptation to say, can we adopt the Alto solution? It seems like we need to, if we want to consider that, we need to have a charter discussion about what it even means to adopt solutions and agree on that before we could adopt any particular or multiple solutions. It seems like we got to get the horses and carts in the right order here. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. Just one comment with chair hat on. Absolutely. When we started with the initial charter, there was a sense that there was an initial set of work to be performed, such as requirements and data model, and that once that was done, then we would look to see what would be the next steps. And so maybe we are closing in on that as we get some of these initial documents done and as we understand how we're working as a group. Please.
Yes, on top of the comment from Joel, just to comment to say that we are using Alto, so we are not specifying Alto, but certainly, yeah, probably I mean, I acknowledge the concern from Joel. Probably the point here would be to generalize that as off-path solution, so not focusing on one single solution, but basically in the off-path approach, and maybe simplifying with Alto, maybe with some others as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Daniel King. Yeah, I don't want to get embroiled in the sort of discussion on the messaging protocol because the hackathon itself could just literally use the Yang model and write to a bit of memory and get read by something else. What we'd like to do, I think, with the hackathon is make sure that the Yang model is suitable. A use case, the tidal use case, was one that we've been discussing because it's so easy to understand and doesn't require a satellite simulator, and it's something easy to implement through Mininet if we want to simulate, or GNS3 or something. So I definitely support a hackathon. I would strongly suggest, and I guess I'm talking to myself here as well, that we publish the plan via the mailing list and then see if others want to participate as well.
Has a chair ever said, don't take it to the mailing list? Yes. No, just very much agree. That's the way to have it. We just have 2 minutes left. There was a short discussion on the chat, specifically around the idea of a different use case, which was the Leo use case. So while we are here, question is, just like we would have an applicability statement with examples for title, would we create applicability statements for other examples, and would Leo constellations be one such example? Which is, I believe, what my interpretation of the question from the chat.
I jumped. I'm off the app, so this is this is Lou Berger. I didn't see the last document as an applicability statement. I'm sorry. That was a framework of something, but it was not an applicability statement. So I think you got to be really careful in what terms you're using.
So the charter item is an applicability statement,
Sure,
but there
but
is no such document yet. This is
right.
the
The last
building blocks
document,
to get to one.
The last document was pitched as an applicability document, and then the title was framework, and I was very confused of why we're talking about applicability. Now you're talking about applicability again. It's very confusing.
To be fair, this is the first draft of that document. It just got published this week. Comments to the mailing list would be appropriate.
Rick Taylor, again, I've turned the app off. I'm really sorry. I was on my way out the door. Concerning the Leo satellite, great as a document. I think there's a lot of open questions that you could fall into when you start to talk about LEO satellites. I would suggest that's more of a research topic, perhaps approaching someone IRTF about how to do that. I don't think a suitable hackathon topic either. I think trying to build a LEO satellite constellation scheduler in a hackathon is unlikely to succeed. But yeah.
No, no, much appreciated. There's a gravity joke in there, which I won't make, but we will. All right, any other last quick comments before we end our final minute? All right, very good meeting. Thank you all so much, and see you all in Dublin at 1:21. Tony?